They say Hollywood has seen every kind of betrayal, every ego, every meltdown, every burned bridge imaginable. But even in a place famous for backstabbing and second chances, there are moments, rare, electrifying moments, when the industry makes a unified decision. A line in the sand, a collective whisper that becomes a roar. And this time, that roar had a name attached to it. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Meghan Markle. But the part no one expected? The man leading that whisper was director Jason Orley. Now ask yourself this. What makes a director who built his reputation on talent, professionalism, and quiet consistency suddenly turn around and cut ties with one of the most talked about women in entertainment? What makes him privately tell Amazon MGM executives that Meghan Markle is not welcome? What makes him speak a word, that one vicious, jarring word, that no Hollywood creative uses lightly? Traitor. It's a word that hits like a hammer, a word that stops conversations, a word that ends careers. Why would he say that? Why now? What did Meghan do that crossed a line, even in an industry where the line is blurry at best? You're about to find out. But before we dive in, let me ask you something even more uncomfortable. Have you ever tried helping someone who didn't just push your help away, but turned around and blamed you for trying in the first place? Have you ever stood beside someone, defended them, believed in them, only for them to rewrite the story and cast themselves as the victim and you as the villain? That's the emotional blueprint of this entire saga. Because this wasn't a simple Hollywood rejection. This wasn't a studio saying a project wouldn't fit their brand. This was personal, intimate, quietly explosive. And according to insiders, this was one of those moments where everyone in the room knew something irreversible had just happened. The fallout didn't just stain Meghan's reputation. It exposed something much deeper about why, slowly but surely, one studio after another seems to be distancing themselves from her. Amazon MGM was simply the one bold enough, or fed up enough, to say it out loud. But what exactly was said? And why did it hit so hard? Let's rewind for a moment. To understand why Jason Orley's decision matters, you need to understand the world he moves in. He isn't a loud director. He's not the kind who makes headlines for screaming at actors or storming off sets. He's the opposite. Calm, steady, respectful. The kind of director actors love because he listens before he speaks. The kind who builds careers quietly, without theatrics. So when a man like that decides to cut ties entirely, that's not anger. That's not a petty grudge. That's a breaking point. And every insider who talked about this moment repeated the same phrase. He had a reason, a big one. But here's the twist. The reason didn't come from the meeting everyone assumed. Not the pitch session, not the studio review, not the creative discussion. The moment everything changed began earlier. Smaller. In a room where no cameras were rolling and no PR teams were hovering. And what Meghan said in that room? Well, let's just say it revealed exactly why so many people in Hollywood feel burned by her. But before we get to that moment, the one Jason Orley reportedly called the final straw, we need to understand why this story matters now. Hollywood is desperate for stability. The streaming landscape has never been more cutthroat. Amazon MGM is under pressure to justify every project, every dollar, every risk. Executives are looking for reliability, consistency, professionalism, and public goodwill. They can't afford chaos. They can't afford unpredictability. And they definitely can't afford branding disasters. And Meghan Markle? She brings attention, yes. But attention is not the same as stability. Just ask Spotify. Ask Netflix. Ask the producers who walked away. Ask the executives who stopped returning calls. There is a growing pattern. A very public one. A pattern built of projects announced but never delivered. Creative disagreements that spiral. Expectations that rise higher than the budget. And a tendency, some would say a habit, of shifting blame when things fall apart. So when Jason Orley allegedly told Amazon MGM Studios she was not welcome, it wasn't about one conversation. It was the culmination of everything that came before it. Attention is good. Chaos is not. And some insiders say Meghan brings both. But here's the real heart of the story. Meghan came into that Amazon MGM meeting with the intention of rebuilding her Hollywood footing. She wanted something fresh, something exciting, something she could control. A new project, a new image, a new beginning. And for a brief moment, It looked like it might work. Until it didn't. Until she said something, one single remark, that changed Jason Orley's entire perception. A remark that hit him like a betrayal. A remark that made him tell colleagues, "She isn't someone we can trust." Trust. That's the word that matters. Not fame, not clout, not influence. Trust. Because in Hollywood, you can survive controversy. You can survive bad press. You can survive a flop. But the moment you lose trust, you're done. And according to those who were there, Jason Orley lost trust in Meghan in an instant. The question is, why? But before we get to that turning point, the moment the meeting soured, we need to talk about something else. Something the public often forgets. Something Meghan herself may have underestimated. Amazon MGM is not Netflix. It's not Hulu. It's not a soft entry point into Hollywood. It is one of the most competitive, ruthless, and calculated production environments in existence. You don't walk into Amazon MGM. You earn your way in. You prove you're worth the risk. And to this day, sources say Meghan walked into that room with the one attitude the studio despises most. Entitlement. It wasn't intentional. It rarely is. But it was there. Subtle. Confident. Breezing through the room as though the deal were already hers. As though the studio needed her more than she needed them. Hollywood hates that. Producers hate that. Directors especially hate that. Jason Orley? He's built his whole career on respect. On mutual collaboration. On humility. So when someone sits across from him and starts listing demands before demonstrating commitment, it hits him personally. Not as a director. As a human being. But Meghan didn't stop there. She invoked a name. One name. That changed everything. A name connected to controversy. A name that made every executive shift slightly in their seats. A name that carried baggage Meghan should have known not to bring into the room. And that's when everything shifted. Orley's expression, the energy, the tone of the meeting, the future of the collaboration. But we will get to that moment soon. Because before the meeting ended, before Meghan walked out smiling, before the executives scribbled their notes, something was already breaking behind the scenes. The seeds of rejection were already planted. And someone in that room was already drafting a message, one that Meghan was never supposed to see. A message that would leak. A message that would crush any chance she had at Amazon MGM. A message that contained one brutal line. She's not someone we should move forward with. 7 words. 7 career-altering words. 7 words that would ignite everything that followed. But here's the twist. Meghan found out. She wasn't meant to. It wasn't intended for her eyes. But when that message reached her, everything exploded. She reacted. And when Meghan reacts, she doesn't go quiet. She goes big. Phone calls, emails, questions, demands, accusations. And who did Amazon MGM turn to for clarity? Jason Orley, the man who had already decided he was done. The man who wasn't going to protect her. The man who allegedly said the words that would echo through the building. No one helps you because you betray everyone who tries. In Hollywood terms, that sentence is lethal. But you know what's even more shocking? The story didn't end there. Because what Meghan did next, what she tried to pull, what she attempted behind the scenes, that's the moment the industry shifted from frustration to alarm. And that moment is exactly where this story picks up next. Because everything you've heard so far, it's only the surface. The real betrayal, the real accusation, the moment Jason Orley made the decision that would permanently bar Meghan from Amazon MGM, that comes next. And no one saw it coming. The moment Jason Orley first crossed paths with Meghan Markle was supposed to be simple, polite, professional, neutral. Just another industry greeting between two people who worked in different corners of Hollywood but were now, unexpectedly, orbiting the same potential project. No drama, no tension, no storm clouds on the horizon. But hindsight is cruel. Because looking back, every single person who was present for that very first interaction, every assistant, every coordinator, every producer, would later say the same quiet sentence. That's when it began. So here's the question. What exactly began that day? Because according to insiders, this wasn't a clash of egos or creative disagreements. It wasn't a heated argument or a bold statement. It was something much smaller, much quieter, much more dangerous. A red flag, a subtle shift in energy that only a seasoned director like Jason Orley would notice. A moment that seemed harmless at first, until everything erupted later and everyone realized it had been a warning. Let me take you back to that afternoon. The sun was bleeding through the tinted windows of Amazon MGM's executive conference suite, the kind of room where careers are made or quietly destroyed. Polished wood, soft leather chairs, bottled water lined up in perfect symmetry. The standard Hollywood stage for decisions that the world never learns about. Meghan arrived first. Of course she did. She entered with the confidence of someone who believed the meeting was already a formality rather than an audition. She wasn't rude. She wasn't unprepared. She wasn't chaotic. But she radiated an energy that made the room adjust to her rather than the other way around. You know the kind of presence I'm talking about, right? Someone who walks in already convinced the deal is done. Someone who believes people are lucky to be in their presence, not the other way around. Someone who views collaboration as a spotlight, not a partnership. And Jason noticed, not because he was looking for it, but because directors like Jason Orley are trained to read people. It's their job. They watch mannerisms, subtle shifts in posture, micro-reactions, the way someone speaks to assistants, the way they navigate silence. Silence reveals more truth than words ever will. And that silence told Jason something he didn't say out loud. Not yet, but definitely felt in his gut. She's expecting something from us she hasn't earned. The meeting hadn't even started. But Jason remained calm. Always calm. He nodded, greeted her, offered a seat. He spoke to her the same way he would speak to a young emerging actor or a billion-dollar producer. Focused, respectful, grounded. But Meghan didn't mirror his grounded energy. She leaned forward, spoke quickly, talked about ideas before hearing the studio's direction. She skipped the part of the meeting where people usually exchange soft pleasantries and went straight into the "here's what I want" part. That's not inherently wrong. Plenty of creatives lead with confidence. But Meghan's confidence carried something else underneath it. A pressure. She didn't ask what Amazon MGM was looking for. She didn't check where the studio's priorities were. She didn't even ask what Jason Orley needed as a collaborator. She assumed. And in Hollywood, assumptions are slipperier than ice. Because when you assume the room wants you, you lose awareness of the room itself. Still, Jason remained professional. He listened. He nodded. He took mental notes. But internally, something was shifting. And here's where things get interesting. It wasn't Meghan's confidence that bothered him. It wasn't the tone. It wasn't her posture. What struck him was something entirely different. Something people who work closely with Meghan have whispered for years. She name drops. Not occasionally. Not strategically. Habitually. And in this meeting, she dropped a name that froze the air for half a second. Hollywood names are currency. Some open doors. Some close them. And Meghan dropped one of the latter. A controversial figure. Someone tied to industry turbulence. Someone Amazon MGM had distance from. Someone Jason Orley deeply disliked. Professionally, not personally. The moment she said it, Jason's eyes flickered. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just enough for the assistants present to exchange a quick glance. Insiders later said that was the moment Jason realized something. She doesn't read the room. She tries to control it. Let me pause right here and ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone tries so hard to impress you that they end up revealing something they shouldn't? Something that backfires? Something that tells you more about them than their prepared words ever could? That's what happened to Meghan in that moment. She didn't know the politics surrounding that name. She didn't know Amazon MGM had quietly blocked collaborations with that person. She didn't know Jason Orley had turned down a project because it involved that individual. She thought invoking that name would elevate her. Instead, it did the opposite. Still, the meeting continued. Jason didn't flinch, didn't correct her, didn't shut down the conversation. He was too professional for that. But inside, his trust meter had dipped. Not a lot. Not catastrophically. Just enough to register. Enough to stay cautious. Meghan kept talking, unaware that she had just stepped into a creative landmine. She talked about vision, themes, messaging, optics. She talked about her audience reach, her brand narrative, her strategy for global positioning. Words that made the marketing team nod. Words that made the executive team raise eyebrows in interest. But Jason wasn't nodding. Because something felt off. Meghan talked about collaboration, but described control. She talked about storytelling, but focused on perception. She talked about authenticity, but leaned into image. Jason Orley is a storyteller by craft. A director who values emotional truth, character-driven narratives, and creative integrity. So when someone approaches a project prioritizing optics over substance, he senses it immediately. And that's when he noticed the second red flag. Meghan hadn't not once, asked a question. Not about the script, not about the studio, not about the creative challenges, not about the audience, not about the why behind the story. She was pitching, not listening. This is where the tension quietly took shape. Invisible to Meghan, clear as daylight to Orley. Because directors don't want to work with people who want control. They want to work with people who want collaboration. But here's where things get truly interesting. While Jason was noticing these red flags, Meghan was doing something else entirely. Something subtle. Something she had done in countless meetings before. She was studying the room. Not emotionally. Strategically. She watched the way executives responded to her words. She measured who leaned forward and who leaned back. She tested phrases to see which ones generated energy. She adjusted her tone based on the reactions she perceived. She was calculating. Not in a malicious way, more in a self-preserving way. Like someone who believes every room is both an opportunity and a trap. Someone who feels they must always be 3 steps ahead. But here's the problem with that mentality. When you're calculating the room, you're not connecting with the room. And Jason Orley is a director who values connection more than calculation. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. Plenty of time for ideas to flow, for creative synergy to emerge, for a sense of partnership to form. But Jason felt none of that. And yet, remember this, he still didn't cut ties. Not yet. Not even after the name drop. Not even after the control-heavy pitch. Not even after the absence of questions. Because Jason Orley is not impulsive. He doesn't burn bridges without giving someone a fair chance. But he did walk out of that meeting with one thought he shared privately with a colleague later that evening. She's not what she pretends to be. Harsh. Maybe. Accurate. Only time would tell. But here's the twist. Meghan walked out with the exact opposite impression. She thought the meeting went perfectly. She believed she had impressed the right people. She assumed the project was moving forward. She told friends she'd had a strong breakthrough conversation with Amazon MGM. 2 people. Same room. Completely different interpretations. And that contradiction? That's exactly why everything later exploded. Jason sensed danger. Meghan sensed victory. The studio sensed potential, but also risk. And risk in Hollywood is a gamble most studios avoid unless the reward is astronomical. The energy had shifted. The seed of concern had been planted. Jason Orley had begun quietly stepping back emotionally, even if Meghan didn't know it. But none of that mattered until the moment that came next. Because while the first meeting revealed the cracks, the second meeting? That's where the cracks became fractures. And the moment Meghan mentioned one specific name, the name that changed everything. The name that ignited the fire that would burn the bridge completely. That moment didn't happen during a pitch. It didn't happen in a boardroom. It didn't even happen in a planned conversation. It happened unexpectedly, accidentally, in a hallway. And what she said in that hallway, that was the moment Jason Orley decided he couldn't work with her. But what did she say? And why did it hit him like a betrayal? What happened next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. There are moments in Hollywood when the wrong word, the wrong phrase, or the wrong association doesn't just shift the energy in the room. It detonates it. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes instantly. Sometimes so subtly that the people involved don't even realize what they've done until the aftermath hits like a tidal wave. This chapter begins with one of those moments. And all Meghan did was say a name. One name. A name that, according to insiders, should never have left her lips. A name that told the entire room she didn't understand the stakes, the politics, or the unwritten rules of Amazon MGM. A name that instantly sealed Jason Orley's opinion of her. But let's start with the hook. Because what if I told you that Meghan Markle, in less than 15 seconds, accidentally revealed exactly why Hollywood no longer trusts her? What if I told you that the single biggest mistake she made wasn't something she did on purpose, but something she slipped into conversation casually, confidently, as if it were harmless? And what if I told you that this moment, this tiny crack in the foundation, became the earthquake that led to Jason Orley reportedly calling her a traitor? You're about to see how it happened. But first, picture the scene. The hallway outside Amazon MGM's executive suite is quieter than the meeting rooms themselves, almost sacred. This is where reputations are whispered about. where assistants walk faster, where executives decompress between pitches, where creatives lean against the wall to catch their breath. And that day, just minutes after Meghan's meeting, that hallway became the place where the conversation that changed everything took place. Jason Orley was exiting the conference room, binder under his arm, head slightly lowered, processing the meeting in that calm, analytical way directors do. He wasn't angry. He wasn't insulted. He wasn't dramatic. But he did feel uneasy. The red flags from the meeting were swirling. The entitlement, the agenda, the name drop that hit him wrong, the way Meghan had dominated the room without connecting to it. He just wanted to get to the elevator and decompress. But Meghan intercepted him. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just confidently, too confidently. "Jason," she said, stepping directly into his path. "I wanted to follow up on what I mentioned earlier. You know those moments when someone stops you to continue a conversation you weren't planning to have? When you're already mentally done with a topic, but they pull you back into the quicksand. That's what this was." Jason stopped, because he's respectful. He smiled, because he's professional. He listened, because that's what he does. But Meghan made a second mistake. She didn't read his body language. She didn't see he was trying to leave. And she didn't understand that a post-meeting hallway catch-up is where Hollywood careers have died quietly, without fanfare. Meghan leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was sharing something exclusive, confidential, powerful. And then she said the name that froze Jason's expression. The name that made the assistant walking behind them nearly trip. The name that would later become the most whispered moment of the entire week inside Amazon MGM. Let's pause here and talk about Hollywood politics. There are names in this industry that carry weight, not because of scandal or fame, but because they're radioactive. They're connected to failed deals, broken trust, lawsuits, internal conflicts, or situations studios want absolutely nothing to do with. Meghan didn't know any of this. Or worse, she didn't care. She dropped the name like she was offering an endorsement, a connection, a leverage point, something that would impress Jason Orley and show she was plugged into powerful circles. But to Jason, it was the opposite. That name was a red flag, a warning sign, a reminder of a project he'd once been attached to that collapsed spectacularly because of that same individual's behavior. Something messy, something chaotic, something he vowed never to be associated with again. So when Meghan said it, smiling, expecting validation, Jason didn't smile back. His face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Ask anyone in Hollywood. The quiet shifts are always the loudest. Meghan didn't pick up on it. She kept talking. She explained her connection to the person. She said the individual had always believed in her potential. She added that the person had encouraged her to expand her Hollywood influence strategically. Strategically. That word alone made Jason stiffen slightly. Because strategic influence? That wasn't the language of a collaborator. It was the language of someone who cared more about optics than storytelling. But Meghan wasn't finished. She said the individual could help package the project, which in Hollywood means influencing the creative direction, choosing the production team, or even steering casting decisions. She thought she was offering a power move. Jason saw it as an intrusion. Directors hate when outside influences try to hijack their creative control. Studios hate unexpected attachments. And producers? They hate when someone tries to force a partnership with someone who isn't trusted. Meghan was unknowingly walking into a minefield. And she kept walking. Jason tried to politely disengage from the conversation. He said things like, "We'll see what the studio has in mind," or "Let's keep the creative process organic," or "It's still early, so we'll figure things out." Subtle boundaries. But Meghan didn't hear the boundaries. She heard hesitation. And she pushed harder. You ever watch someone push on a locked door thinking it's stuck, not realizing it's locked for a reason? That's what this moment was. Then came the moment that insiders say shifted Jason's entire perception. Meghan said, "People don't realize how much influence I actually have. They need to stop underestimating me." In isolation? Harmless. But in context. After the name drop, after the entitlement, after the strategic boasting, it landed wrong. Very wrong. Because that's the line studios hear from people who cause trouble later. And Jason has dealt with actors like that before. People who view collaboration as leverage. People who rely on influence instead of skill. People who carry a sense of grievance they turn into pressure. he began realizing that Meghan wasn't there to create something meaningful. She was there to reclaim Hollywood status, to prove something, to show power. He could see the hunger, not the artistic kind, the political kind. The hallway fell silent for a moment. But Meghan broke the silence with something that insiders later described as the nail in the coffin. She said, "And trust me, if certain people can vouch for me, everyone else will fall in line." There it was. The line Jason Orley hates most. Hollywood directors do not fall in line. Studios do not fall in line. Creatives definitely do not fall in line. Because falling in line means surrendering their artistic sovereignty. It means allowing outside influence. It means bending to someone else's image management. Jason doesn't fall in line for anyone. He didn't even fall in line for studios with budgets 10 times the size of this project. So why would he fall in line for Meghan Markle? When Meghan finished speaking, she smiled, believing she had strengthened her position. Jason nodded politely, believing the opposite. But here's the twist that makes this moment even more dramatic. Someone overheard. An Amazon MGM development assistant who was walking by carrying printed notes. Someone who wasn't supposed to hear the name Meghan dropped. Someone who had been briefed months earlier to avoid any association with that individual because of unresolved legal complications with past contracts. She stopped walking. She looked at Jason. Jason looked at her. That look carried 1,000 unspoken warnings. Meghan didn't notice any of it. She kept talking, planning, strategizing, describing how powerful this connection could be for the project, talking about her ability to bridge Hollywood and global influence, painting pictures of a cinematic empire she believed she was building. You ever watch someone confidently build a tower out of cards while everyone else in the room knows a single breath will take it down? That was the hallway. But here's the most important part. It wasn't the name drop itself that hurt Meghan. It was what the name drop revealed. Jason saw it instantly. So did the assistant. So did anyone who heard about the hallway moment later. It revealed. She didn't understand Amazon MGM's internal politics. She didn't respect boundaries. She didn't value collaboration. She believed influence would move mountains. She was aligned, proudly aligned, with someone the studio considered toxic. And that last part? That was the deal breaker. Hollywood forgives many things, but aligning yourself with the wrong person, that can get you quietly locked out of rooms forever. Jason ended the conversation politely, a masterclass in restraint. He said, "We'll revisit this with the team," which is Hollywood language for "this is not happening." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. He let out a long breath. And insiders say that's when he muttered the sentence that would later echo through the studio. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. Not in a threatening way. Not in an arrogant way. In a tired way. As if he had just seen a storm forming on the horizon and knew he didn't want to be anywhere near it. Now here's the part that truly sealed Meghan's fate. Jason wasn't the only one who heard about the hallway. By the end of the day, 3 executives had been told. By the end of the week, 7. By the end of the month, the story had become studio lore. One name drop. One hallway. One misunderstanding of Hollywood power dynamics. One crack that would become a fracture. But this chapter ends with something even more shocking. The hallway incident wasn't the moment Jason Orley decided to cut ties. That moment was still coming. Because Meghan wasn't done. Not even close. And what she did next. What she said next. What she demanded next. That's the moment Jason Orley reportedly used the word that would haunt the entire situation. Traitor. But why that word? Why that accusation? What did Meghan do to earn such a label? The answer is coming. And no one in the studio saw it coming. What if I told you the moment Jason Orley officially shifted from concerned to absolutely not happened not during a confrontation, not during an argument, but during a pitch meeting that Meghan herself believed she had completely nailed? What if I told you Meghan walked out of that room smiling, while Jason was already planning how to distance himself? And what if I told you that pitch didn't just expose a creative mismatch, it exposed something far more alarming? Because this chapter isn't about a bad idea, or a bad script, or a bad mood. This chapter is about the moment Meghan Markle revealed, without realizing it, that she didn't just want control, she expected it. And that expectation became the spark that would burn down the entire possibility of collaboration. Let's begin with the hook. Have you ever heard someone pitch a project so passionately, so confidently, so intensely, that you suddenly realize the project isn't the center of their universe. They are? Have you ever sat in a room where a pitch was supposed to be about storytelling, but instead it was about power? Because that's exactly what happened the day Meghan delivered her Amazon MGM pitch. Now here's the twist. The pitch itself wasn't the problem. The problem was what the pitch revealed. Let's go inside that room. This wasn't the first meeting. The small warning signs had already been planted in Meghan and Jason's initial conversations and the hallway incident. But this was the high-stakes moment. The big one. The pitch that Meghan believed would secure the partnership, validate her creative vision, and place her firmly back inside Hollywood's inner circle. She entered with energy, with confidence, with charisma, with a certainty that Amazon MGM would embrace her ideas instantly. The executives sat around the long oval table. Jason sat closer to the center, notebook open, pen ready, expression neutral. Assistants were quietly typing, observing everything. Meghan stood at the head of the table. Not by instruction, but by instinct. She took control of the room before the pitch even began. And in that moment, she made her first miscalculation. Because here's something most people don't understand about the Amazon MGM environment. Confidence isn't the key to winning a room. Clarity is. Awareness is. Humility is. Yes, even in Hollywood. And Meghan didn't open with humility. She opened with dominance. She started with a line that insiders later said set the wrong tone immediately. She said, "Let me tell you why this project needs me. Not why I'm excited for it. Not why I believe in it. Not why I think it fits Amazon's vision. Why the project needed her." There's a world of difference between those phrases. Most creatives lead a pitch by showing why they align with the project. Only people trying to reassert power lead by claiming the project aligns with them. From Jason's perspective, that was the first red flag. But he kept listening. Meghan began describing the concept of her show: stylish, aspirational, global, socially conscious. She presented a narrative that blended celebrity access with humanitarian messaging, lifestyle elements, and personal branding opportunities. It was sleek, polished, marketable. But here's the problem. It wasn't a story. It was a strategy. And Jason is not a strategist. He's a storyteller. So as she laid out her idea, he started seeing it not as a creative endeavor, but as a political maneuver. A way for Meghan to rebrand herself, reclaim cultural status, and position herself as Hollywood's moral figurehead again. You can always tell when someone pitches a project for personal redemption instead of artistic expression. The language shifts. The tone shifts. The priority shifts. And Meghan's language wasn't creative. It was corrective. It was rehearsed. It was defensive without sounding defensive. She wasn't pitching a show. She was pitching an image. But the executives didn't notice right away. They listened intently, scribbling notes, raising eyebrows at the potential metrics. Meghan's brand still held value, even if it was controversial. But Jason wasn't looking at the analytics. He was looking at the integrity. And that's when Meghan made mistake number 2. She began listing her non-negotiables. In any Hollywood pitch, the list of non-negotiables comes last, if at all. It rarely comes early. It never comes before the collaborative conversation, and absolutely never comes before the creative direction is mutually understood. But Meghan, confidently, unapologetically, laid out her conditions. Full creative oversight. Approval of all casting. Approval of all storylines. Final cut review. Authority to approve PR narratives related to the show. Her preferred executive producers. Her preferred cinematographers. Her preferred consultants. Her preferred branding team. In other words, total control. Now imagine sitting in a room listening to someone who hasn't delivered a major creative project in years demand full control authority before even finalizing the concept. Jason's pen actually stopped in the middle of his notes. Insiders say that was the moment he realized. She's not pitching collaboration. She's pitching monarchy. Still, he stayed calm. He always stays calm. But inside, something was shifting. Hard. Meghan continued. She began describing how she wanted the show to be shot like a movement, framed almost like a doca feminist manifesto centered on her worldview. She used phrases like, "My voice needs to lead the narrative. I want the audience to understand my transformation. The world will finally see the real me. This will reframe my global image. Reframe my image." That was the sentence that made one executive drop his pen, silently, carefully. Because in Hollywood, you never reveal emotion in a meeting, but your hands always betray you. Because producing content to reframe one's public image, that's not storytelling. That's not documentary work. That's not entertainment. That's propaganda. And studios hate propaganda. They may indulge it quietly when it aligns with their brand, but they will never openly attach themselves to a project that screams, "This is about boosting one person, not serving the audience." And Meghan's pitch was about Meghan. She kept talking, faster now, as if she could sense the room wasn't fully aligning with her vision. She described herself as a misunderstood global figure. She emphasized how unfair narratives have overshadowed her true intentions. She talked about reclaiming power, reclaiming identity, reclaiming her story. And every time she said the words, "my story," Jason flinched a little more internally. Because the project wasn't about her story. Not the way Amazon MGM understood it. Not the way studios fund content. And then Meghan made her biggest mistake of all. She said, "This isn't a show, it's a message." In the abstract, that's a powerful line. But in the context of a studio evaluating risk, audience retention, and creative viability, that's a warning signal with a siren attached. Because studios aren't set up to deliver messages. They're set up to deliver entertainment. Jason knew that. The executives knew that. Meghan did not. She continued, "I need to teach people what really matters. I need to correct the narrative." Correct the narrative. Jason wrote those 3 words down. Slowly, deliberately. Because that's what told him she wasn't there for storytelling. She was there for vindication. He glanced up as Meghan continued talking, animated, passionate, determined. She was trying to convince the room that she had a cultural duty to reshape public perception, that she had risen above adversity, that she needed to use the show as her platform to finally get justice. But here's the truth Hollywood insiders whispered afterward. It wasn't empowerment she wanted. It was absolution. Her pitch wasn't a creative proposal. It was a narrative correction attempt. But even that isn't what broke Jason. What broke him was what came next. Meghan began describing a scene, one she insisted must appear in the final cut. A scene where she confronts public judgment. A scene where she symbolically reclaims her crown as a respected public figure. The room fell dead silent. No one knew how to respond. Not because the idea was bold, but because it wasn't a scene. It was therapy, and she wanted the world to watch it. Jason blinked slowly, trying to mask his surprise. One of the executives coughed, pretending to adjust his seat. An assistant looked down, typing invisible words to avoid making eye contact. Meghan was still talking, unaware of the emotional earthquake she'd just triggered in the room. Then she said something that sealed everything. "This show needs to prove that the people who doubted me were wrong." Jason's mind froze. Proof. Wrong. 2 words that should never appear in a pitch. Because storytelling isn't about proving anything. It's about revealing something. Meghan's pitch wasn't a reveal. It was a revenge arc. And Jason saw it clearly. He saw it so clearly that he immediately recognized something dangerous. If this project ever got approved, he would be tied to the fallout. His career, his reputation, his integrity, his standing in the industry, all tethered to someone determined to use television as a corrective weapon. And Jason Orley doesn't sign up for weapons. Now, here's the part Meghan truly didn't understand. Amazon MGM is strategic, calculated, politically aware. They know how to spot risky collaborators. They know how to sense tension. They know when a pitch is masking something deeper. And Meghan's pitch wasn't just masking something deeper. It was announcing it with a megaphone. The tension was becoming unbearable. Executives exchanged glances. Assistants looked nervously between speakers. Jason closed his notebook slightly, subtly signaling his disengagement. But Meghan kept going. She introduced her trusted people who would act as consultants. She mentioned the same controversial name again. She framed it as necessary for authentic representation. That was the moment the head of development leaned back, hands clasped tightly, expression unreadable. Jason knew that look. That was the look of a studio quietly saying, "No, absolutely not." But Meghan had no idea. She believed she was winning the room. She believed her passion was persuasion. She believed she was en route to a green light. And then, at the end of her pitch, she smiled and said, "So, when do we begin?" The silence afterward was so thick it could have been cut with a studio-grade boom mic. Jason inhaled deeply. The executives exchanged hesitations disguised as thoughtful pauses. Everyone in the room knew the real answer. Not now. Not ever. But Meghan didn't see that. She misread the silence as consideration. She misread the concern as contemplation. She misread the discomfort as deep thought. Jason felt the weight of the entire situation pressing down on him. This wasn't going to work. Not creatively. Not politically. Not ethically. Not professionally. And he knew it. But he also knew something else. Something far more dangerous. Meghan wasn't going to walk away quietly. And she didn't. Because what she did after the pitch, what she demanded, what she said, what she tried to force, that is when Jason Orley truly snapped. That's when he used the word traitor. That's when he said she wasn't welcome. That's when the Amazon MGM executives moved to shut down any further discussion. Because the pitch wasn't the disaster. The aftermath was. And what happened in the hallway after this pitch? That is what changed everything. And no one in that room saw it coming. What if I told you that sometimes the biggest explosions don't happen inside boardrooms, or during high-stakes negotiations, or in front of cameras? What if I told you that in Hollywood, careers are often made, or destroyed, in the hallways between meetings? Quiet, unscripted, unfiltered. Because that's exactly what happened on the day everything between Meghan Markle and Jason Orley officially fell apart. This wasn't a public moment. It wasn't a dramatic showdown. It wasn't even a planned conversation. It was a hallway encounter. A few seconds, a few words, and an emotional shift so powerful that one executive later said, "After that hallway moment, everything changed. We all knew it." But what happened? What did Meghan say? What did Jason hear? And why did those few seconds matter more than the entire hour-long pitch meeting that came before? Let's begin at the hook. Have you ever overheard something that instantly changes your opinion of someone? Something that feels small on the surface, but reveals everything underneath? That's what this moment was. It began less than 2 minutes after the pitch meeting wrapped up. Jason Orley walked out first, not in a rush, not upset, but in that calm, reflective state directors tend to enter when their instincts are buzzing. He wasn't processing the creative details anymore. He was processing the behavior, the tone, the entitlement, the patterns. Behind him, the executives were gathering their laptops. Assistants were collecting notes. Meghan Markle was speaking to an Amazon MGM coordinator, her voice faintly animated. Jason reached the hallway and paused for a moment. He needed air. He needed space. He needed to breathe out the tension that had slowly wrapped itself around the meeting room like invisible fog. This is something creatives do. They step out, reflect, try to find clarity. He wasn't angry, not yet. He wasn't judgmental, not yet. He was simply uneasy. His instincts were whispering, "This isn't right." Meanwhile, Meghan was finishing up inside the room. She wasn't aware that her pitch had landed like a weighted stone in a shallow pond, loud enough to be noticed, disruptive enough to create ripples, but not deep enough to anchor stability. To her, the meeting had gone well. She believed she'd impressed the right people. She believed the silence was thoughtful consideration, not concealed concern. And because she thought she had momentum, what she did next was driven by confidence. Too much confidence. She walked out of the conference room with her head slightly lifted, her smile polite but firm, and her tone upbeat. She spotted Jason in the hallway, and she headed straight toward him. This is where the energy shifted. Jason wasn't ready for a follow-up conversation, emotionally or professionally. He needed distance. Meghan needed validation. The collision was inevitable. "Jason," she called out, her voice echoing lightly in the quiet corridor. He turned politely, because that's who he is, calm, steady, respectful. She closed the distance quickly, heels clicking, posture assertive, eyes bright with the belief that she had won him over creatively. And without hesitation, she said the line that insiders claim was the first spark of the explosion. "So we're aligned, right?" I could tell in the room. "You get what I'm trying to do." Aligned. That word hit Jason like a jolt. Not because it was offensive, but because it was wrong. They weren't aligned. Not creatively. Not professionally. Not ethically. And Meghan's assumption, that false certainty, revealed something deeper. She wasn't seeing the room. She was seeing her version of the room. But before Jason could respond, Meghan continued. Fast. Confident. Unfiltered. I mean, this project is obviously mine to lead. They know my voice is the selling point. You saw how they were listening. They want what I want. They just need you on board to bring it to life. Jason blinked. Slowly. They want what I want. They just need you on board. Two phrases that landed in his mind like weights. Because those phrases didn't describe collaboration, they described dependence. Not mutual respect, hierarchy. Not partnership, control. And deep down, Meghan's words suggested something else. She didn't believe she needed Jason. She believed Jason needed her. That imbalance was the second spark. But the third spark? That was the one that set the fire. Meghan stepped closer, lowered her voice as if she were sharing an inside secret, and said, "And honestly, Jason, once the show launches, people will stop questioning everything about me. This whole industry will finally understand why they should have supported me sooner." That line froze Jason in place. Not because of its content, but because of what it revealed. This wasn't about a project. This wasn't about storytelling. This wasn't even about entertainment. This was about vindication. She wanted the show to prove her right. That's not how creative work operates. That's how vendettas operate. But the real breaking moment, the sentence that made Jason Orley's expression change ever so slightly, the one witnesses later said, was when he shut down internally, came next. Meghan said, "And you don't need to worry. I'll make sure everyone knows you supported me early. Loyalty matters. Loyalty matters." That was it. That was the sentence. Because when someone says they'll make sure people know you were loyal, the subtext is clear. Loyalty is being demanded, not earned, not reciprocated, demanded. Jason's mind snapped into clarity. Because in Hollywood, loyalty is not an obligation. It's a bond formed through trust, respect, and shared creative purpose. And what Meghan described wasn't loyalty. It was allegiance. As if he were joining her side in a battle he didn't even sign up for. As if working with her meant endorsing her conflicts, her grievances, her narratives. And a director who values neutrality, professionalism, and artistic independence, he would never allow himself to be pulled into someone else's war, especially not a public one. Still, Jason remained composed. He gave her a polite nod. He said something diplomatic like, "Let's let the studio process everything." And he took a small step back. He needed distance. Emotionally, professionally, instinctively. But Meghan took his distance as hesitation. And she pushed. "You're with me on this," she said, not as a question, but as a declaration. "I can count on you." Right. Count on you. Another pressure phrase. Jason's jaw tightened, just slightly. Nothing theatrical, but enough. Because in a single sentence, Meghan suggested two things. That he owed her loyalty simply for hearing her pitch. And that not supporting her would be betrayal. And that word, betrayal, has more weight in Hollywood than most people realize. Because behind the glamour and success and polished PR statements, Hollywood runs on trust. Careers survive because of trust. Projects succeed because of trust. Directors get hired because of trust. Actors get opportunities because of trust. And Jason Orley had just realized something he never wanted to realize. He didn't trust her. Not her intentions. Not her motivations. Not her version of the truth. Not her understanding of collaboration. He saw danger. Not dramatic danger. Professional danger. The slow erosion of creative stability. And the hallway was silent for a moment. But Meghan broke the silence again, with the sentence that turned the spark into an inferno. "These executives are smart enough to know that rejecting me is a mistake. You know that too. And trust me, anyone who doesn't stand with me eventually regrets it." She said it casually, softly, almost playfully. But the meaning? It was a threat. A veiled, almost careless threat. The kind that reveals everything about a person's worldview. Stand with me, or regret it. That was the line. The line that told Jason Orley the truth. She didn't want collaboration. She wanted allegiance. She didn't want creative partnership. She wanted soldiers. She didn't want artistic unity. She wanted loyalty through fear. And that was the final spark, the moment Jason's face cooled. A witness, a junior coordinator, was walking down the hall at that exact moment. She saw his expression shift. Not anger. Not frustration. Not annoyance. Resolve. A quiet, unshakable resolve. Jason Orley had made his decision. Right there in the hallway. He realized the project was over. The collaboration was impossible. The situation was too dangerous to touch. And he also realized something darker. If he didn't distance himself fast enough, he would be pulled into a narrative he wanted nothing to do with. Meghan, completely unaware, smiled again. She believed the hallway conversation had strengthened her position. She believed she had secured Jason's support. She believed the partnership was nearly locked in. She walked away confident. Jason walked away knowing the opposite. And yet, the most shocking part of this entire chapter? Jason still hadn't cut ties. Not officially, not publicly, not internally, because the hallway moment was only the beginning. The real explosion happened later, when a single internal message leaked. A message Meghan was never supposed to see. A message that would make her lash out. A message that would create chaos inside Amazon MGM. A message that would make Jason Orley use a word no director uses lightly. Traitor. And what was in that message? Why did it ignite everything? Why did it push Meghan into a full-scale reaction that rattled the entire studio? That's where the story goes next. And no one was ready for what came after. Every Hollywood downfall has a trigger. A moment. Not always loud. Not always public. Not always dramatic. When the whole structure begins to collapse. A moment that feels small on the surface. Almost accidental. Almost trivial. Until you realize it was the match that lit the entire fuse. For Meghan Markle and Amazon MGM, that moment was a message. A simple internal notification. A line of text not meant for her eyes. A private exchange that was never supposed to leave the studio's internal channels. But it did, and it changed everything. Before we get to the message itself, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone accidentally discover the truth before they were supposed to? Have you ever witnessed the look on someone's face when they realize the story in their head doesn't match reality? Have you ever seen someone convinced they were winning, only to learn behind-the-scenes conversations were going in the opposite direction? That's exactly what happened to Meghan, and the fallout was seismic. Let's go step by step through this moment, because every detail matters. It begins the morning after the pitch meeting and the hallway confrontation, the two moments where the energy was already shifting, where the red flags were growing, where Jason Orley had reached his personal breaking point even if he hadn't said it out loud yet. The executives gathered early for a debrief. Small room, dim lighting, stale coffee, a room where polite corporate phrases mask blunt truths. The meeting had three goals. Evaluate the pitch objectively. Evaluate Meghan subjectively. Determine whether Amazon MGM should move forward. Jason wasn't present yet. He was running late, which meant the executives spoke more candidly than they would have if he'd been there. One executive said, "It's not a pitch. It's an agenda." Another added, "She wants full creative control without delivering creative clarity." A third said, "We can't attach the studio to a personal revenge narrative." Those were the early warning signs. But the line that mattered the most came from a high-ranking development executive who had been trying, genuinely trying, to give Meghan the benefit of the doubt. He sighed, leaned back, and said, "She's not someone we should move forward with." 7 words. 7 words that Meghan was never supposed to see. But here's where fate, or carelessness, depending on how you see it, stepped in. Because an assistant took notes during that debrief meeting, and that assistant forwarded the notes to a slightly larger distribution list than intended. And one of the people on that list was connected to someone on Meghan's team. And that person forwarded the message to Meghan. What happened next was described by one insider as immediate, violent, shockingly fast. Because Meghan didn't read that message and sit quietly. She didn't process it thoughtfully. She didn't step back to understand what went wrong. She reacted explosively. Before we get into her reaction, let's take a closer look at the message itself. Because understanding the context is crucial for understanding why Meghan spiraled and why Jason Orley stepped into his most decisive moment. The message wasn't long. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even personal. But it was honest. It consisted of 3 key bullet points. The pitch lacked creative coherence. The control demands were disproportionate to the project's scope. Meghan did not demonstrate the collaborative mindset required for Amazon MGM productions. Professional, neutral, factual. But then came the final sentence, the one that mattered. The one that Meghan fixated on. The one that became the spark of the meltdown. She's not someone we should move forward with. To the executives, this was standard corporate language. To Meghan, it was betrayal, rejection, humiliation, a direct insult, a dismissal of her vision. A confirmation of everything she believed Hollywood had unfairly done to her for years. And because that sentence landed in isolation, without tone, without nuance, without context, it became a weapon in her mind. But here's the part few people know. When Meghan read the message, she initially thought it was a mistake. She believed it had been sent accidentally. She believed the executives didn't mean it. She believed someone internally had sabotaged her. She believed she had supporters who were being overridden. In other words, she believed the world was bending to stop her. She didn't consider the possibility that the studio simply didn't like the pitch. Because to Meghan, criticism doesn't mean improvement. It means betrayal. And that belief, that internal framework, is exactly why what came next spiraled out of control. Meghan picked up the phone. Not once, not twice, multiple times. She called executives. She called coordinators. She called public relations contacts. She called assistants. She even called someone she thought she had impressed in the pitch meeting and left a voicemail demanding explanation. One assistant said, "It was chaos. She was calling everyone except the person who could actually answer her questions. Because she didn't call Jason." Not yet. First, she contacted an Amazon MGM executive directly and said, "I need to know who said this." Now, her tone wasn't confused. It wasn't hurt. It was furious. The executive tried to calm her, saying, "Let's take a step back and debrief constructively." But she cut him off. "No. Someone is trying to undermine me. I deserve answers." Deserve. That word. That entitlement. It rattled the executive. He tried again to de-escalate. Meghan raised her voice. "I will not be dismissed. I will not be embarrassed. And I will not be disrespected." Within 15 minutes, the entire executive floor knew Meghan had seen the message. And they all knew something else. Jason Orley needed to be informed. Because Meghan's anger wasn't just directed at the executives. It was directed at anyone she believed had not supported her in the meeting. And she believed Jason had betrayed her. Why? Because of her assumptions, her misreadings, her confidence that he had been on her side, her belief that he had connected with her pitch. When the executives explained that directors often give neutral reactions, even when they disagree, Meghan was blindsided. She didn't like hearing that. She didn't believe it. She said, "Jason understands me. He knows what I'm trying to achieve. He would never say something like this." That line chilled the room. Because the executives realized something Meghan didn't. She had formed a narrative where Jason was her creative ally, even though he wasn't. And now that narrative was cracking, which meant Meghan was about to shift from anger to accusation. The studios knew what was coming. They had seen this pattern in other celebrities. They knew the next step. They almost predicted the next sentence before Meghan said it. "Jason must have told you not to move forward, didn't he?" The executives froze. Because they hadn't told her that. She leaped to that conclusion on her own. And that leap was dangerous. Because once Meghan believes someone betrayed her, even if they didn't, she responds as if they did. And guess who was the next person she called? Jason Orley. But before we get to that call, before we get to the most explosive interaction of this entire scandal, we have to return to the leaked message itself. Because one detail makes this moment even more shocking. The message wasn't intended as a final decision. It was an early assessment, a preliminary evaluation, not a rejection. But Meghan treated it as a verdict. And because her response was so extreme, so fast, so confrontational, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, the message that said she might not be someone to move forward with became the reason she ultimately wasn't. Hollywood has a golden rule. If you handle pressure poorly behind closed doors, you will not be invited to appear in front of cameras. And Meghan's reaction was textbook poor handling. But the studio still wasn't prepared for what happened next. Because after confronting the executives, after demanding answers, after insisting she had been betrayed, she placed the call that would break the trust completely. She called Jason Orley. And that call, that was the moment everything exploded. Insiders say Jason rarely raises his voice. He rarely speaks sharply. He is rarely emotional. But during that call, he reached a level of clarity and finality that stunned everyone who heard about it after. Because that's when he used the word that Meghan Markle never imagined she'd hear from a respected Hollywood director. The word that echoed across Amazon MGM. The word that sealed her fate. Traitor. But what led him to use it? What did Meghan say on that call?